guys? Welcome to episode 43 of CMDTower's Brews and Builds. I'm Mr. Comma number 5, and my fellow host took the first place ribbon for brewing at the Inventors Fair. Big time. What's going on?
Hello, Mr. Combo. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm all right. Other than the microphone things that we were trying to work through. Yeah, we recorded news and it sounded fine, and then all of a sudden GarageBand's like, you know what? Let's crank Mr. Combo up to 11.
I also got a quick shout out. Hello, artificers and artifices.
Oh, there it is.
Which is a little bit of a little deck there. So how we doing? You hanging in there okay? Or
yeah,
just a little jittery.
Yeah. Trying to eat better, and I guess everything I'm doing is giving me more energy. My body is like, hey, where's the cheese and the beer? We need to slow down a little bit. What's all this green stuff? But no, I'm good.
There hasn't been a slice of jerky in weeks.
But no, I'm doing all right. You know, me and the girlfriend, we got because we had to cancel Europe, so we've actually scheduled to go out to Colorado with ex-friend of, well, it's not like he's an ex-friend, but he used to play with us, Mr. Denny. So me, his lady, and one of my girlfriend's friends and her husband, we're all going to go out to Colorado to Breckenridge and go hiking and go look at national parks and do that over Labor Day weekend. And then we also got a lake trip scheduled with a couple of her friends for hopefully the end of July. So, you know, it's not the trips that I wanted, but it's the trips I deserve.
Yeah, I hear that.
I got the trips that you needed.
I got the plug on a lake house from my parents. I think I'm honestly just gotta go out there and be like, I'm gonna get away from the city and away from everyone and just like take the weekend off and just relax, do some fishing, have some beers. Speaking of which, quick shout out, Rock Creek Brewing Company right here in Kansas City. They just opened. I'm drinking New England IPAs from them. It's delicious. So
good. I'm glad. That's for those playing the home game. I could literally roll out my front door, fall over, and land at that brewery outside.
Yeah, that's because Squee lives in a cardboard box at the side of the brewery.
Wait, who?
I do
who
indeed.
Is this?
Yeah.
Who are we talking about? Who's this Squee person that we're discussing, Mr. Combo? Does he have something to do with this podcast?
Oh, that's right. Know your place.
Blasted.
Super exciting, guys. We do have a special guest on, over from CMDR Central and the EDHREC cast, Mr. Dana Roach. What's going on, Dana?
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So how's life going for you up in Minnesota?
Minnesota. I'm not quite. I'm like an hour-ish away from the cities. So I'm in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's at the border. But summer's here finally, and I'm feeling pretty good about all of that. You know, avoiding
the long winter's over.
Yeah, the long winter's over. We're maybe on the other side of this whole plague thing. So maybe. So I'm doing all right.
Luckily, though, the best news about all that is even though we're on the tail end of it, it's still all anyone ever talks about and all you ever hear about. So you can really tell that we're banding together to get through this thing.
Good news, Dana. You're giving me old school feels. My family's all from like northeastern Iowa, and I hear the both. I have it too. I like it. I love it. I want more of it.
So, why don't you kind of tell the collective out there what you do, some of the content that you're a part of, and any special projects you may be doing?
Sure. So, I came back to Magic. I played it in my youth, and I actually quit right around Ice Age block. So I started playing relatively young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had my roommate in college, it would have been my sophomore year, had a nervous breakdown and stole everything from myself and our other roommate. So he pawned my entire Magic collection for like $20 bucks.
Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story like that. Yeah. Like everyone's gotten ripped off. Everyone's been like, "Oh yeah, I left my collection with my friend," and then he came back, and you're missing like a bunch of duels and all that stuff.
Yeah,
it's happened to everybody.
Duels. There was a couple boxes in there. So, Now, in grand scheme of things, the other roommate, he wound up opening a bunch of credit cards in the other roommate's name, so he actually had to declare bankruptcy.
Oh, see, he got worse.
So all told, I came out okay, just losing my Magic collection.
That's the award for best backstory I've ever heard. I love it.
But at that point, I'm like, I'm done. I'm not going to try to rebuild a collection. And I'm like 20 years old or whatever. So I just stopped. I was done. And then, 6-7 years ago, I had a friend at work that played, and he kept, at some point, I mentioned I used to play, and he kept badgering me. So
as that works.
I bought a few packs, and
it's a Tuck specialty.
Went to a pre-release and found out about Commander and just kind of got hooked.
It's that Commander.
Yeah.
It's that happened to me too. I got out of the game, and then Mr. Combo told me about Commander, and I was like, wait, we can play with more than 2 people?
Right? Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
All right. I'm back.
Now here's a real question, Mr. Roach, if you will. What's your Commander deck count at?
I'm sitting at I think 11 decks because I just finished putting one together today. So I think today actually might take me to 12.
Okay, but so, I can see that yours are very focused on quality in them as opposed to the quantity like mine.
And what I tend to do is I'll build a deck and play it, and if it doesn't like mentally click somehow, and it doesn't have to be super powerful, but it has to do something to like make me kind of fall in love with it. And if it doesn't do that, I take it apart. I can usually tell pretty quickly if it's going to hook me or not. And if it doesn't, it off to the boneyard.
And you don't just swap out commanders. You don't swap out commanders 7 times in a row until you finally find something that's okay.
I'm usually looking for like some real specific hook. So like the deck I'm building right now, I built a Pestilence deck. So that's the hook. So I put all the pieces together, and I want to try that out hopefully in the next week or so.
I got a Pestilence from Big Tuck many moons ago. That was maybe 6 to 8 months ago, right when the podcast started.
Great card.
So when I came back anyway, and I had got a play group in town where we started playing Commander, and we used to go out for dinner and beer every night before Commander night. So we'd meet after work, have a couple beers, have pizza, whatever, and just like then BS about Commander the whole time, basically. And at some point someone said, we should just put a microphone down and record this, because essentially this is a podcast. And then we said, well, let's actually just do that. So a couple of the friends that I was doing that with, we decided to start recording mostly just, for the fun of it, just for the heck of it. And then once I'm doing that, I'm using EDHREC and I'm looking for writers. And, well, let's do that. And then EDHREC's like, well, let's do a podcast. So now I'm doing, 15 things.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's awesome, man. So, obviously you still have like an IRL job, but I mean, with you being involved in so many things, and it sounds like you're kind of, spreading and branching further into Magic, do you ever see a point in your life where it's like, I'd love to do Magic full time and kind of have that be my shtick?
I don't think so. I've got a pretty good job. I had a wife and a kid, so like the stability
of the wife and kid will do it to you.
Absolutely. And I think once I start, if I were to do that, that might take some of the fun out of it. It gets to be just fun right now. Like and if at some point it ceases to be fun, I can just stop doing it. That freedom is really nice. Whereas I think if I lost that, I that would change things. I don't know if I want to do that. So I like the way things are going right now. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do more stuff, but like I don't see it as a career type situation.
I think you really hit it on the head with the fun thing, because I actually got to play a couple games with Big Tuck's arch nemesis Jimmy Wong in Vegas. And honestly,
also, real quick, I know we haven't talked about this for a while, and I've kind of had a change of heart. And I just want to let you know, Jimmy, that I'm still coming for you. And also, I'm very excited to not see you in Mulan, because that got delayed. So double suck it.
But literally, it was the command zone area where you kind of get assigned a random Magic, celebrity personality, however you want to describe it. And, I was in one of the pods that Jimmy got to come play in. And I mean, he just looked stressed. And he had a person constantly coming over. Okay, you got this many minutes to do this. Then you have to be here. He did not seem to have fun at all. And then even when we kind of sat down to play the game, it was just, I don't know if he is a super serious player. It doesn't come off that way, at least on game nights. But I would kind of see different people that, have, the massive YouTube channels in Vegas, and just a lot of them didn't seem to have fun. And, the ones that, are a little bit smaller in size compared to those, CCO, EDHREC, even ourselves, it seemed like us, we're kind of all at that sweet spot to where we do this and we enjoy it and we sink time and energy into it, but it hasn't consumed our lives. Right. So we can still enjoy it at the end of the day.
For sure. Yeah.
And I think that's a good spot to be at. Well, guys, thanks for tuning into the episode. And this was only able to happen from our audio producer, Squee McGee, and his company, Rich Chaos Records, here in Kansas City. What's going on, Squee?
Oh, I survived the monsoon of May. Here we are. It rained, I don't know, like 8 inches today. It was a little bit nuts. I'm doing good, though, busy.
That's good.
Having a good
the
time?
monsoon almost took out my magic collection. I was very
Wait,
scared.
did you get water?
I got water in my basement, and I got water right under where I have my shelves, but I think the water just trickled down the wall and got on the ground. Because Dana, definitely I would be in that situation to where if my magic collection got stolen, destroyed, I'm just done. There's no way I'm going to do that again.
There's no coming back.
There's no coming back.
Yeah, the water gave me some flashbacks. The backstory here at Rich Chaos Records is I bought the house to turn the basement into a studio, and then I turned the basement into a studio, and then about 4 or 5 inches of water came into the basement and wrecked the studio. Then I had to start over and rebuild the whole thing. So I
do want to put a pin in that story though, because you left out the other important part. That same rainstorm, Squee's car got covered in about 4 feet of water.
Oh no, it was over the roof. Over the roof. Anyways, that was the same evening, so that was a rough time. But we moved on.
And Squee, how did you find out about your car?
It was on the news. I watched my goddamn car sit under 4 feet of water on the goddamn news, and then I came home to my only place of solace to find 4 inches of water on all my music gear and all my shit.
Poor hapless man forgot to roll up windows. No, I'm joking.
Well, and so the crazy thing about it, Dana, is we were all at the bars, and of course we'd been drinking. We're like, hey, it's storming. Let's just Uber home. Be safe. And Squee was like, I'll just get my car tomorrow morning. So it's not like he saw his car be kind of flooded and be like, ooh, this is awful. Bad. He thought everything was going to be fine. And then we just get home. We're like, man, it's kind of flooding. Let's turn on the news. And then there's his car.
Oh, it was, I believe friend or not friend of the cast, Mikhail, pointed out, he goes, hey, is that your vehicle? And I said, oh, no.
Indeed it is.
Anyways, so that gives me a little flashback. But yeah, I've if you need tips on keeping your basement dry, I figured it out by now. Fill in all your window wells that you possibly can without going out of code with concrete.
Good to know. I'll remember that.
Well, guys, if you want to know more ways you can support the CMDTower team and all the content that we put out, head over to our sponsor, level1gameshop.com. They sell magic accessories like our exclusive CMDTower playmat and Mad Hunter Pack sleeves, and they also do have a great TCG player store with over 99% accuracy rating and very competitive prices. Plus, we've actually had some early on discussions with the kind of social distancing and how many people can be in a business, and be on the lookout because we will be doing a CMDTower takeover draft. That they are going to close down the store, find out how many people they can support with the space they have, with the 6-foot rule, and it's going to be a very exclusive event. You'll be able to come, draft, play some games, and hey, when Big Tuck gets too frustrated to continue on draft and he's like, screw it, I'm done, you could go jam an EDH game with him as a sidebar.
I envision this being like that scene in Coming to America where both families are sitting on the ends of a super long table.
And for those playing the home game, that will be after round 1. So if you want to hook on jamming some games, then it is a very high possibility of doing so.
Another way to support the show is to head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/CMDTower. We do actually have some new patrons to announce, which is super exciting. Woo! I know people keep giving us money for some reason. I don't know why.
It's because we bring that content.
That mediocre content at best. So, of course, thank you, Matt Nance. He's actually someone from our local play group that's kind of started to recently kind of migrate himself in here. Marketing Ross is just slowly bringing in more subjects into the collective. So appreciate that.
As Marketing Ross should be marketing. I like it. Yep. It's very fun.
And then we do have Jason Kangimi from Texas, so thank you. And actually, it was pretty cool when he joined. He actually shot me this great detailed message about kind of how he got into EDH and playing Magic, and his son's birthday was actually, I think, the day that he signed up, and he got his son his very first EDH deck, a Reaper King deck.
Oh, so, awesome.
Yeah, and so I actually... when I sent his care package, actually included some stuff from the CMDTower team for his son's birthday. So, happy birthday, son of Jason.
So that's the kind of good news we want.
Yeah, and then, of course, we got William from Rochester, Minnesota. Not sure where that is in relation to where you are, Dana, but hey, they're probably within an 8 to 10 hour drive. I think that's a safe bet.
Rochester's about 90 minutes-ish away.
Oh,
there we go. Thanks for joining the collective. We really do appreciate the support, and find more people to bring in. We need to just infect everyone. Magic term.
Nice.
Get it.
Yeah.
But we do have 4 different pledge levels if you are interested, and rewards vary from just getting access to our very savage Discord or getting your own set of signed CMDTower playmat and those sleeves. And of course, the free way is just share the content you're already listening to. Every little bit of interaction from the collective does really do help. And every episode, we do want to give a big shout out for the music provided in the beginning and the end from Pink Royal. And of course, stay tuned until the end so you can get details on who you can win in the June giveaway. A drum roll, please. There we go. Chandra's Spellbook. Thank you, level 1. That's going to be super sweet. Well, Brews and Builds is our deck tech series, guys, and it's all about the decks that Big Tuck, our guests, and I have on our Path to 32. And every episode, we're going to talk about one of those Path to 32 decks, but in a cool manner of brewing some beers. And so we kind of broke it down into 4 categories, and the first one's going to be ramp and setting your board state. That's the grain build.
Yes, and the grains are the actual foundations of every beer. They include both base malts and specialty malts, usually in about a 60-40 ratio. This helps with color, taste, and most importantly, the alcohol content of the beer. Deck always needs ways to grow, stabilize, and ramp into your bigger threats, and just like a grain profile, they're usually a mix of staples and specialty cards.
And then the next one's going to be, how does your board really interact with your opponents? We're calling that a hop profile.
Yes, and hops give the beer its patented bitterness and herbal floral flavors. They grow in a variety of strands, help distinguish subcategories like IPAs, or specifically New England IPAs, like this Plymouth Haze from the aforementioned brewery. Our hop choices help clear and interact with the board so your deck can do it at once.
And then the next thing is going to be, how does your deck accomplish either its goal or win the game if you're a savage like myself? We're calling that yeast.
And yeast are living microorganisms that eat the sugar from the grain and poop out alcohol and CO2. It adds the alcohol content and the carbonation. Without yeast, you'd be drinking flat sugar water, and without yeast cards, your deck wouldn't meet the goal of actually winning the game.
And then we have shenanigans. These can be pet cards, synergies that are in the deck that maybe are just fun. They don't really fit it. This deck has none of that because Mr. Dana Roach is streamlined as hell, but we call that a spice package.
Yes, and similar to decks, not every beer has something that makes it pop, but spices and additives do help separate a normal stock beer from a specialty one. It could be the pepper that turns a stout into a jalapeno stout, or the addition of hops and other citrus that turn an IPA into a double IPA. Like I said, not every deck has something that makes it pop, but if it does, this is where we talk about it. And I do have a special one to talk about on this one.
Well, and then to kind of seal the deal on this, we do have a bottle capping. These are going to be Big Tuck's, Dana's, and myself's recommendations to the deck that are under $5, under $50, and a personal recommendation that actually has no budget. The only restriction is we can't talk about mana-only lands. So without further ado, let's get brewing. Today, we are talking about Mr. Dana Roach's Vela the Night-Clad Intimidating Machinery deck. Dana, I've actually never seen a Vela deck, so this was very exciting. I did see you post it on Twitter. Some people were wanting to see your deck list, so it seems like something that your community knows a lot about. But give us a little bit of insight. How did you kind of choose this to be your dimir deck or artifact deck, and how's it kind of grown through the time?
So, I don't want to have overlap among the colors of decks I build. So like if I have a Rakdos deck, I'm not usually looking for a second Rakdos deck. I didn't have a Dimir deck. So, I would then periodically just, look through Dimir commanders as if magically 3 or 4 new ones had appeared. That's never really happened. But, something will jump out at you. And Vela, I always liked the art. Like, that was the main thing. Whenever I would skip through, I'd be like, that's just a really good-looking card.
Yeah.
What could I do with it? And I'd look at it and like, all right, I don't know. And I would move on, and nothing would ever kind of click with me. So at some point, I finally, fixated. I'm going to figure this out. What can I do? Okay, what can I do with Intimidate and stuff that has Intimidate? And I thought about Infect. I'm like, maybe they could try Infect because then creatures would have some form of evasion. But that's...
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't want to do that.
Sure.
So then Eldrazi. Well, hey, colorless Eldrazi. If I play them, they will have Intimidate, and they'll be virtually unblockable.
Sure.
No one wants to play Eldrazi. I don't like Eldrazi. I don't want to be against them. I certainly don't want to play them. I'm like, okay, well, I guess artifact creatures. And at that point, if I'm going to run 20 artifact creatures, I might as well make it into an artifact-centric deck.
Sure.
So I, jammed in 20 artifact creatures and tried it out. And then over the course of trying that out, discovered that, okay, well, there's pretty good synergy there with artifact tokens, because a lot of artifact stuff makes tokens, and Vela's ability to sacrifice creatures and have those deal damage. So I found some synergy there. Tezzeret then really works nicely. A bunch of Tezzerets with dealing damage based on artifacts you control. So I just found a bunch of kind of weird synergies that I didn't intend, just because I'm like, this card has cool art, and I guess I'll try artifacts and see what happens. And it wound up being a deck.
That's awesome. And I think literally the reason you chose Vela is what makes EDH so cool. And so many of our contemporaries talk about it, to where it's not just, hey, I'm looking at the tier 1 list. Here are the 4 decks like in Modern. Here are the 4 that I got to build if I want to be competitive. EDH, it's 100% just like weird, funky interactions that really, because honestly, when I see Vela, my initial mind goes to blinking. Like, oh, I want to do a blink thing, and I'm just going to be blinking stuff left and right. Well, that's not a whole lot of fun. If you go to the EDHREC website, there's a whole section on creatures that are just like ninjutsu, because they're coming in and out. And okay, so maybe ninjas is a sub theme. Well, I mean, if I'm going to do ninjas, I'm going to do the actual ninja deck, not use Vela. So yeah, I like the direction that you did with it. I liked your deck restrictions. And like we were talking about pre-cast, this was the toughest deck that I have personally done on this channel, from a cuts and adds, because it's like I could cut this, but it's like, but it kind of messes with what he's trying to do, so I can't do that. What were your thoughts?
That's in large part because I'm just an obsessive tweaker, and that's because I have rules baked into the deck, because if I didn't have rules, then who knows how far I would take it. So if I say, okay, specifically none of this, none of this, none of this, then I can turn the screws as tight as I want to, as long as I don't violate whatever presets I've set ahead of time.
Right. And and to kind of echo that, like, I've never seen a dimir. I've seen one dimir artifact deck that I think former friend of the cast Will, or whatever he's called now, no longer friend of the cast Will, has. But I think it's interesting that you don't think blue is kind of like a sub artifact color, right? Like, there's a lot of value in that, but you don't really see a lot with black that goes into it. And I think that this, looking at it, and again, I haven't seen it played, like, it looks on paper like it'll really work really well. So I like the fact that you definitely broke the color pie out the normal, like, you know, blue black control, blue black mill, those sort of things, blue black zombies, if you will. So I think it's a really interesting deck, and it was like every card that I was like, a lot of ones I was like, aha, I found one, and then I went back in, it's like already in there, and then there's another, like, again, it's like, okay, this is an easy cut, and then you go and relook at the deck list, you're just like, no, that's too good. So no, it's a real fun one to look at, and I can't wait to get into it.
Cool. And so, you know, kind of from a overall deck building perspective, you know, one of the things that Big Tech and I, because combined, me and him have something like 80 decks between the two of us. Yeah. And so when you have that many decks, you can't really do the tweaking as often as you would like. And so what we've kind of noticed doing this cast is sometimes we build a deck and just never touch it. Like, we did an episode on my Dimir zombies with Gisa and Geralf, and literally, I think I put that together and then I never touched it, just because usually big splashy zombies don't come out that often, so there's never really a reason to go into the deck. And so one thing that we've kind of started to dive into, and I'm curious your perspective, is we start looking at CMC, and we start looking at your mana producing versus the actual mana you need. So one thing that I noticed is you kind of have done, and maybe this is on purpose, but I have done this before I started doing the more analytical side, is I would build a deck, and if it's two colors, it's like, okay, I need to have split blue and black. Yep. And I do that, but then when you actually get all the cards in there, you don't actually need split blue and black. You need to kind of off-center it. And I noticed yours is you get a little bit more black mana than you do blue, but your deck is about 66% blue mana. So when you play this, do you ever find yourself having maybe a little too much black and needing more blue to kind of do your multiple things in a turn?
Which is also shocking because your land base costs $827. So normally when you see this Mr. Combo in his decks, you're like, yeah, this should if you have that much money in your lands, it should be pretty much on the nose.
I think you're correct. I think it should be switched the other way. I think I should have slightly more swamps in there than islands. What I'm guessing the reason that is, and it's entirely a mistake on my part, it's probably one I haven't caught, primarily because, number one, it's a good land base. I do have like an underground city here.
Oh no, we saw that. Yeah. Don't worry about it.
And so much of the deck is colorless that I can get away with having the wrong mana symbols and not care, because there's like 40 artifacts in here. I require much less colorless mana than you normally would. So you're right. I think it should be inverted, and I just haven't noticed it because it hasn't been an issue, because I have good lands and so many artifacts that I can get away with having it done incorrectly.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because Dana, to that, you only have a total of 35 pips, whether it's blue or black, in the deck, and that's a little unheard of when you're running multiple colors, because usually you're going to have 50, 60 pips somewhere in there. So I think that does go to that point, but that may be something, I don't know how often you get to play nowadays, but as you play it, if you start seeing because initially when I saw this, it was like, oh man, I should find more ways to get more black pips in here, so we can actually start using that black mana instead of blue, because I don't know about you, I don't know if I've listened to CMDR Central and I've listened to EDHREC cast, and you don't really sound like a savage player by any means, like ultra competitive, and so I don't know how much of it's like, oh, I want to be as efficient as possible and I want to play like 8 spells a turn, or if it's just like, hey, I want to sit down and have a good time, and that could also be why maybe you haven't noticed, because it's like, I got too much black, but I don't really care because I'm having fun.
Yeah, it's an element of that. I do want to be efficient. So I think it's much more that I just haven't noticed, because I have things in the deck that have allowed me to get away with those mistakes.
Yeah, that's fair. And then the CMC, you're at a 3/3/4, which, our cast, a lot of the decks that me and Big Tuck have are between 3/3 and like 3/8, which I feel like is a very healthy area. But then I listen to other podcasts and other YouTube channels, and it's like, this deck needs to be a 2.9. And it's just like, oh God, on my best day, I wish it was a 2.9.
Get out the shears.
And then you bring out last week's deck with, 6+?
Oh, yeah, my Joda deck. Joda's an expensive one.
I usually like to stay sub 3/5 if possible, but I'm not too worried about it, because if something's cool and fun and it's what I want to do, then I'm okay with it being higher. I think I've got a Sphinx tribal deck, and I think that's sitting at like 3/8 or something. But like, Sphinxes are all 6 drops. Like, there's only so much you can do in a Sphinx deck to get that CMC down.
We just talked about my Sphinx deck last week, so I am well aware of the pitfalls of that.
You bet.
Yeah, and I can actually relate to that, because I actually just had commissioned a proxy Game of Thrones deck. I proxied every card with Game of Thrones images or artwork and stuff like that. And one of the challenges I had is, once I got everything in there, because I tried to do as many of the characters as possible, is my CMC was like 4/4, 4/3, and I literally just shoved in all the talismans that I could with the slots that I had to get the CMC down and to try and actually play more than one spell a turn. So it sounds like, you like to be under 3/5. I'm curious, from a general deck building perspective, do you feel like being between like a 3 and a 3/5, that's a healthy area for EDH? Like, if you're just trying to have fun, and even if you want to be a good player,
and you can get away with a little more, and you can, and if you happen to have gotten lucky, because I have decks that I wasn't intending to wind up at 2.9 or something, and it's just by virtue of whatever thing I'm doing in the deck, there's a bunch of small little CMC stuff in there, and it's just gotten there. I've got a Talran deck that's basically a token deck, and it's running a ton of cantrips. It just, just weirdly enough, it's like a 2.2, because I'm just running a bunch of terrible, like sleight of hand and stuff like that. It makes a drink. So like, that wasn't intentional, but it just worked out that way. It looks like it's a much leaner deck than it actually is. So I don't worry about it too much. CMC gets weird too, because you have things like Blasphemous Act is a 9, but it's not a 9. It's usually a 1. Whereas Cyclonic Rift looks like on paper a 2. But it's almost always a 7. So
exactly,
it's good to look at, but you don't want to I don't live and die by the exact number, because there's just so much flex.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's fair. Well, Dana, why don't we start off with the Rampant Grain Bill? What's the first card you want to kind of point out that, if you want to build a Vela Night-Clad Intimidating Machinery deck, you kind of need in that grain section?
I think that the important thing here, grain-wise, is mana rocks, and not just because they're good for any deck, but one of the win conditions in this deck is the ability to turn those into creatures. So there's a Karn in here that can animate those mana rocks. You have what's the enchantment, not Mirror to Besieged, and the Antiquities War.
Yeah.
The Antiquities War has a way to turn all those rocks into creatures too, and Vela giving them Intimidate makes them unblockable. So mana rocks serve a dual purpose. Not that they're not always useful, but it's one of those things, you hear Command Zone always talks about, 10 rocks, 10 draw, whatever.
Sure.
That's more cards than you can't do that in a deck. That takes up more slots than you have. So I usually don't run that heavy on ramp. In this deck, though, I have a few more mana rocks than I usually do, just because they do serve the extra purpose of doing damage when Tezzeret is out, and they serve the extra purpose of being bodies when I need to swing. So in this particular deck, mana rocks are more important than usual, I think, because they do multiple things.
Okay. Is there like one in particular that you would think like, hey, for a Vela deck, you really should have like this mana rock in there? I mean, you have a bunch. Obviously, like Soul Ring, like sure, that's a good card. Yeah. We all know what Soul Ring is. But outside of the norm, is there one that you think like, hey, this one really kind of helps the deck tick?
I don't know if there's anything specifically. I think the cost reducers, Cloud Key, you can, when it comes into play, you choose a card type, and spells that type cost less. That's almost always chosen as artifacts. Sure. But I also have Joyra's Familiar does the same thing. Foundry
Inspector, sure.
Foundry Inspector does the same thing. Because so much of my stuff is colorless, it doesn't take many reducers in this deck where I can just, if I have 2 of those out, I can just start playing 2 mana rocks for nothing.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And actually, Cloud Key is the one that I had actually picked for one of mine because of the thing that you just mentioned, that mana reduction. But the thing I like about Cloud Key with your deck, yes, you got a lot of artifacts and stuff in here, but you still have other card types, plenty of it. So Cloud Key, I kind of look at, we talk about modality a lot on our channel, the ability to have a card that isn't just draw a card and it does nothing else. It's, hey, draw a card if you're in this situation, or maybe you get mana in this situation. With Cloud Key being able to, so if you guys aren't familiar, Cloud Key's 3 colorless, it's an artifact. When it ETBs, choose artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery, and then spells you play of that type cost 1 less to play. It's an amazing card, and I look at it to where this isn't so much whether it's beginning, middle, end of game. I think it kind of depends on your grip. When, depending on what cards you have in hand, you could end up being in that situation where most likely you're going to have a ton of your artifacts. You got a crap ton of artifacts. Right. But it could be one of those weird situations to where, I'm over here, looking, you got 9 sorceries in the deck. Maybe you just hit a bad luck and you got 5 sorceries in hand. Yeah, it might be something to where it's like, hey, instead of me picking artifact, which would be the smart play, I'm going to pick sorcery, so that way I don't just pick artifact and then I'm now binning sorceries potentially if I can't draw into the stuff I need. At least I could cast these things and it costs me a little bit less.
We might be talking about Cloud Key a little bit later. Okay, so,
oh no. Well, so Big Tuck, Cloud Key was my first one. Yeah. Tuck, what's the first one you want to kind of point out?
So I like how I think you have this card in the Grain Mana section, but I think this actually is like one of the best turnkey utility players in the entire deck, in my opinion. And it's a card I really, really like. So we are talking about the big boy, the final form, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge.
Yeah! One of the best cards in the deck.
I didn't even think. No question. Mr. Combo, so normally we've been doing this so long, and Mr. Combo and I we've been friends for a very long time. So like, we kind of, or at least I do. I try to get into his head and choose ones that I know he wouldn't. But this was so difficult, and there's so many options to talk about. I couldn't even think about it. So I should have seen that coming a mile away. But for those playing the home game, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, is a legendary Planeswalker Tezzeret. He comes in with 5 loyalty. He costs 4 colorless and Dimir. He's a mythic. And I'll read the first 2. You want to read the last 2, Mr. Combo?
Sure. Give me the tiny text.
Okay, yeah. And again, I didn't bring my glasses, so here we go.
Per the
use. Creatures, I'll drink for that. Creatures and Planeswalker spells you cast have affinity for artifacts. So that good. Alone is just completely bonkers.
But I would probably run this card if that was where it ended.
Right.
If it stopped right there, I would probably run it in the deck.
Well, and the best part is it's one of those it's a mythic War of the Spark, so it has a static ability and relevant one. So +2, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control. You gain X life. So
how is that a plus ability?
It's It's nuts, right? So you have a grain. So far we have a grain and then a yeast on the same card for 6. And I think before, and I'll let Mr. Combo keep going before I kind of get my thing on this guy. So there's 2 more, and it doesn't stop there, right? So just keep on going.
And so I blacked out for a second because this card's so amazing. I actually bought one right when it came out. I think this was the buy a box promo,
correct?
I believe. Yep. So I bought a box strictly to get this card, and it's just been sitting in my binder for the last year. So I can't find a home for it. But it does come in with 5 loyalty, if that wasn't pointed out. And the other 2 abilities, -3, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. I think that's just good because, Dana, one of the things that Tuck and I talk a lot about is there is a lot of artifact removal, not a lot of enchantment removal. So with you having an artifact heavy deck, I tried to do a Reaper King deck once for Super Friends, and Reaper King could just not stick on the battlefield because creature removal gets rid of it, artifact removal gets rid of it, and some of your game winners are some artifact creatures. So being able to get them back to your hand and then most likely cast it for free because of Tezzeret's static ability is just phenomenal. But then -8, so you could do it on the 3rd turn when he comes in. Exile the top 10 cards of your library, put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. You have 40 artifacts in the deck. The likelihood you're going to get, let's just say 5, you're going to get half at minimum, is very, very high.
And the way it works out is if he doesn't get attacked, he still lives through that ultimate, right? To keep going and then next turn is dealing even more damage. So this is exactly what I want a mythic Planeswalker to be. Costs a ton of mana, has these incredible abilities. Definitely, some people I know have said it's a little overcosted. Yeah, whatever. But in this deck, burning people, gaining life, there's not a bad ability on him with the way this deck is built. So it's just so cool to see that. I love this card. I think it's really great. And I just as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, that's the first thing we're talking about for sure.
I think literally the last time I played this deck, I dropped it on turn 6 and then played a Wormcoil Engine and played Traxos for free.
Oh my God. Nice.
Well, and I think the interesting thing here, and Dana and Tuck, you guys have to correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Affinity was one of those mechanics that Wizard says we're never bringing back.
Right.
And then Tezzeret Master of the Bridge came out and was like, we're liars.
Yeah. Dirty, terrible liars who don't think things through, but anyways, that's a longer discussion.
So Dana, is there one other card that you'd like to point out from a grain perspective that is huge for a Vela deck that's kind of artifact based, or was it Tezzeret Master of the Bridge?
Tezzeret would have been the one I would have picked next, although I will say sack outwits are really useful here at the end of the game, especially because Vela usually doesn't come out until I'm in a position to put a hurting on somebody.
Sure.
And then oftentimes it's okay, I'll slam somebody with, 20 artifact damage from bodies in play. And then if somebody else is, at 6, I can just sack the board to an Ashes Altar or something and dome them with the leave the battlefield trigger off Vela, and then still have mana from the sack to maybe recast something else that was in my hand.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Are really useful here. They're always useful again.
Right.
So what's your thoughts? This is something that Tuck and I had brought up on so many episodes ago. There are more and more ways in EDH, just because we have such a large access to card pools, of enchantments and ways and Okos to kind of turn our commanders into things that we can't really use and you can't really get rid of. So one of the things that I've kind of thrown out there is looking into sacrifice creature outlets. So that way, if someone does Song of the Dryad, your commander, you may be able to sack it in response to get rid of it. And I think that kind of has a lot of play in a lot of decks, but it's just such a narrow thing. But then I kind of do the flip side, and it's well, technically, the only reason you would run a Cyclonic Rift is a very narrow thing. My opponents are going crazy, and I need a way to get out of it. What are your thoughts on having some way in your deck to be able to instant speed either sack your commander, sacrifice a creature, be able to get rid of something because you're just potentially, heck, even the Rakdos Spy chick that she ETBs under your opponent's control, if you put mana into her. Yeah, Xantcha. Xantcha would even be a good one because you control her, so you can sacrifice her. What are your thoughts on having some outlet like that?
Myself, I tend to build decks where the deck will function if I never play the commander.
Right.
But I don't want to, I don't want to feel like I need to have the commander out in order for the deck to work. So I usually worry a little less about those effects. which is maybe a little bit odd because I adore those cards. I love Darksteel Mutation and Lignify and Kenris Transformation. Like any way to make a commander useless, because Chulane, you're not going to solve any problems by killing Chulane. They'll just recast Chulane with the 4 mana they put into play off the Chulane ability and all the cards they drew. There are some commanders you really need to like make them into something worthless to actually slow the deck down. I love those cards. I think there's an Imprison in the Moon here in this deck just for that reason.
I love that card.
Yeah.
So I'm torn. Like it's so tough to find slots for stuff too these days.
Yeah.
That, I think you need to have the added synergy of something else working with the Zach outlet you're running to justify it myself. That's my guess.
Sure.
And we also, Mr. Combo and I think we definitely build commanders like top down. So that's something that we like a lot of the decks we build are based on the commander or like based on their ability, and the deck really like runs really smoothly with them. So I think we're both very aware and have been struck by one of these maladies and been like out of the game for a long time.
And like in this deck, if someone plays a rough enchantment, I'm just like, well, hope somebody else can deal with it because I certainly can't.
Hang on.
Because I couldn't even find slots for counter spells really. I'm in blue and I just like I couldn't. I tried for a while and I couldn't. I just didn't have room. So I just like, well, no counter spells here.
Yeah, like one of the ones that I kind of told Tuck that, in my opinion, any type of deck that runs black up to 3 colors, Phyrexian Tower is probably an auto-include because it taps for mana on its own, plus you can use it as a sacrifice outlet for double black mana. It's in the deck. And it's in the deck. Well, Tuck, what's your last green? Why don't you wrap this up?
Yep, so this one should be pretty quick. I just like this a lot. I don't think it's played as much as it should be. And in this deck, there is, because it's black and artifacts, there is some graveyard shenanigans that can be done. So I just want to touch briefly on Notion Rain. So colorless, blue and a black, it's a sorcery. So surveil 2, then draw 2 cards. Notion Rain deals 2 damage to you. So surveil is pretty much look at the top 2, and you can either put them in your graveyard or back on top of your library. So it's like a sort of scry, except they go to the graveyard instead of the bottom. So in this deck, again, you might see these big threats and be like, okay, I'm just gonna put that in the graveyard and wait for them, and then bring it back with my Tezzeret or something else. Kind of sets up your draws. It pretty much does. It's in this deck. It's effectively a second copy of Read the Bones, except with the modality and be able to put it in the graveyard. So it's a card I really like. It's if you're running things where they deal with your graveyard, you care about cards in your graveyard, you care about Delve. I think it's a card that's a real slam dunk in those. So in here, you're not sacrificing your card draw, and you're potentially filling up your graveyard. Lastly, I will say the artwork on it is awesome because the rain kind of looks like the Matrix coming down. So overall, just a really cool card. We don't, it's definitely kind of more of like a workhorse sort of card. Nothing really to like go into details. Just want to bring it up because we hadn't been able to on the podcast yet.
I'm totally on the same page. Every year EDHREC does like their favorite cards of whatever year, and everyone's picking like these giant splashy things, and I'm always every year I'm like, Notion Rain or Chart of Course was my favorite card this year. Or Winged Words, like anything that like draws you 2 cards for some low amount of mana. I am all over. I love that kind of stuff.
I think this card would actually probably look really sweet in foil with that Matrix Rain and having the dimir symbol in there. That'd be real cool. But no, actually, I haven't seen this card before. This would be something I would halfway honestly consider putting in my Gisa and Geralf decks. One of the issues I have there, Dana, is I'll play Gisa and Geralf and I'll bend the 4, and a lot of times it's non-zombies. It's like, oh, there goes my Liliana Planeswalker, and there goes my enchantment. So this almost seems like a better version of Gisa and Geralf, because in the Surveil 2, it's like, do I want to leave these on top? Or if they are zombies, like, yes, get rid of them and let's get to the other stuff. I don't potentially lose out on some big splashy thing. So no, that's a cool card. I'm gonna have to make a note of that. Well, guys, that's going to wrap up the Rampant Grain Bill. Now to head over to the Board State and Hot profile, I'm going to start this off with a card that I literally saw do some work during our 40 Life in a Dash with our play group. Very, very, very cool card. And it's something that hurts the thing I love most, Planeswalkers. We're talking about Hex Parasite.
Oh, yeah.
So, Hex Parasite, you can pay a colorless to play it, and it's a 1/1 artifact creature insect. Sitting at a cool $2.50, so not going to break the bank.
Right.
You could pay X, and let's just be honest, it's 2 life. It's a Phyrexian black.
Let's not kid ourselves here. It's X and 2 life.
Remove up to X counters from target permanent. For each counter removed this way, Hex Parasite gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Counters are becoming so much more relevant in EDH. Yes. It seems like every year, like even in the Commander 20 precons, now we have this Abzan commander that deals with flying and death touch counters and all of that kind of stuff. So that can, that's now becoming more relevant. Energy counters, that used to be a thing. But no, like, Planeswalkers run rampant now in EDH more than ever because of War of the Spark. Used to be Planeswalkers were either A, very costly mana-wise or very costly money-wise, and that usually prohibited it from being in a deck. But now with all the uncommon Planeswalkers and even the more expensive mana ones with the static abilities, more people are putting them in. So being able to interact, and especially since you don't even have to tap Hex Parasite to do it, it doesn't say it's sorcery speed. Oh, you just played that, Tezzeret Master of the Bridge. Well, you'll get unactivation off of it, but I'm going to remove all the counters if you don't do what I want. So it can be political. It can save you. I think this card is just phenomenal.
The utility is fantastic, and even like using it on myself with the Antiquities War.
I was just going to say that,
so I can keep doing it. There's just there's always something useful that it does.
Yeah, and then again, and it also can get like the fact a lot of people might just look at it and be like, okay, it's a way to remove counters. But again, since it gets that intimidate, this also could very well turn into like quick 5 points of damage, quick 6 points of damage, right? Like kind of sky's the limit. If you do want to get in the red zone, or if you just need that like last little push, if you want to get a little bit more aggressive with it, as opposed to like waiting to do it at instant speed.
And similarly, Spellskite kind of functions the same way. Where it's just
that's one of mine.
Yeah, that's one of mine too.
It just sits there doing 6 different things and annoying people. I've stolen so many enchantments with it. When someone goes to throw an aura on something, and I'm like, I'll just take that with my Spellskite. Thank you very much.
Right. And again, so like I looked at Spellkite. So for those playing the home game and who didn't play Modern for a long time, Spellskite is 2 colorless and it's an 0/4 artifact creature horror. It's a rare, sitting at $10, and for Phyrexian blue, scratch that for 2 life. You can change the target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. So what's funny is it's so good. And I was looking, it's like, so are you just playing like Modern Arcbound Ravager? Because you have all the modular cards, you have Spellskite. It's like, did you have a Modern deck that you just like were like, I'm done playing that, and then now I have this. But no, I think I agree, right? Like shuts down Voltron, shuts down Bolts, shuts down Path to Exiles. Like Vela is an expensive card, right? So it sucks if you play that and then someone just bolts it, or rather like Path to Exiles or Swords of Plowshares or whatever. And this is a card where you'd much rather just have that eat it. And we talked about this a lot last podcast, where this is like a modular card for your opponents, right? So as long as this card's on the battlefield, this is going to affect the way they look at the game. This is going to affect how they're going to play it, how they're going to interact with your board, how they're going to interact with their board. Just does a lot in a pretty small package.
Both those cards are just like role players that they're here to do 6 different things and always be annoying for people I'm playing against.
Well, and I think, these 2 cards literally embody what we kind of talk about from a hops section, the way that we do our deck building at CMDTower, is you want ways to interact with your opponents regardless of what your opponents are doing. And we talk about it. We love these modular things, and both of these literally do 18 different things to Sunday. Like, I would love to have a Spellskite so that way I could combat Duffman's Feather deck.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm so tired of Feather. You know what? Fine. Your thing will get exiled and you'll get it back to hand, but Feather isn't going to just blink out and come back in and, be able to block. My Spellskite's going to blink out and come back in.
Yeah.
And you know what would probably happen with me is I'd probably pay the 2 life so many times that I'd kill myself, but I'd be happy about doing it.
And then you die off your mana crypt.
Correct. But those were both of mine. So, Tuck, I know Spellskite was one of yours. Yeah. What is your last?
So I want to talk about another card I love, and I'm really glad it's been reprinted a couple times and finally dropped in price. So this is like, I love cards that are super high risk, super high reward. And you also talked about you don't have a lot of ways to deal with enchantments or directly with planeswalkers. So I thought it was a great time to talk about All Is Dust. So all his dust is a 7-drop, 7 colorless tribal sorcery Eldrazi, very relevant in this deck, I might add. Pretty much reads, each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls. So we talked about how this is like a 40 artifact deck. So and you're really hedging your bets against yourself here, right? So I talked with Single Aaron. He's like, you should run this in any monocolored deck, and I was like, yeah, maybe. But in this deck, the risk is worth the reward, because 9 times out of 10, when you're casting this, even if it does bin a Tezzeret in your commander, you still have everything to go off of, and your opponents may have literally nothing, and they're like, great, I had this huge board of tokens or whatever, and now I have Soul Ring, another mana rock, and another mana rock. So I guess I'll just try to rebuild inefficiently.
And it has burned me before, where like I'm playing against someone shows up and flips your commander, and it's like Traxos. And I'm like, okay, it's Traxos, which is a bunch of mana rocks and swords or something. And then I draw all his dust on turn 7. I'm like, oh, that's not going to do anything.
This is a blank card.
Right. But for every one time that happens, there's 20 times where it leaves up 2 mana rocks for everybody else and leaves up 9 things for me.
Exactly. But the good news is, even when you do draw it as a blank card, it has some pretty baller flavor text. The emergence of the Eldrazi isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as you've already lived a fulfilling and complete life without regrets from some relic hunter. So at least you have something to read and think of better times. But yeah, all his dust is great. I'm really glad it's dropped in price. It used to be like a $20 card. Now you can pick it up for like 5 or 7. Definitely keep it on your radar there.
Cool. Well, Dana, I think Spellskite might have been one of your first ones. What is your last Hops card?
My last Hops card here is probably going to be Imprison in the Moon. We mentioned it before.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's not a lot of ways in black or blue to deal with planeswalkers. You have Hero's Downfall, a few things like that. But Imprison in the Moon takes care of a planeswalker or a land, which is some nice utility when someone drops that Cabal Coffers, or even a Nykthos sometimes, or a Core Haven sometimes can like cause you problems.
Or like a
lands out there.
We've run into this before, and we talked about this, like Glacial Chasm starting to kind of make a run in our local play group, and it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need to shut stuff off. And the fact that you can shut off someone's commander in this case as well, and have them, they don't have a sack outlet, it's just sitting there being a rock. So it's again, the utility is amazing, can do a lot of different things. And I would run 2 if I could run 2 of them.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. So, the interesting thing with me in this card, so if you guys aren't familiar, it's 2 colorless blue, enchantment aura, and like Dana just said, you can enchant a creature, land, or planeswalker, and then it's literally a colorless land.
That's a waste.
And adds a waste. And it loses all other card types and abilities. So when I came back into Magic, because I also, Sweet McGee got me into playing, that would have been like 02, 03, 04, sometime around there. We literally played for like a year and a half, and then we realized, hey, we like girls, we're going to leave the house, not play cards, and go drink and party. So fast forward to when Big Tuck got me back into it. That was right. I think Battle for Zendikar had been out for a little bit. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Eldritch Moon followed?
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Yes.
The Shadows over Eldritch Moon right after that. Yep.
Yeah, so Eldritch Moon was kind of like the first full set that I was going to an LGS and participating in pre-releases, and I remember hearing, oh my gosh, why did they give Blue this card? Blue doesn't need more things like this. And I was thinking as like a noob, like, what? Like, it's a good card, but why is Blue overpowered? I don't understand. Now, as a seasoned, grizzled old man, Wizards, you made a boo-boo. Blue did not need this card. Yeah. This card is filthy good.
Well, I think it's funny too, and we don't need to get into it, but so black is the premier creature removal. I think you have literally one black removal spell in here, and the rest of them are all like the blue staples. So just funny how it's like, oh yeah, it certainly seems like a fair color to me.
It was one of those things. I think I had Go for the Throat in here, like as removal for the longest time, and I think I did have Hero's Downfall, and I kept finding situations where Go for the Throat wouldn't hit something that I needed it to hit. And I eventually was like, is that going to be, like, do I care if I give someone a 3/3 pig?
No.
It's just never relevant. So, yeah, weirdly enough, like, Blue, in a blue-black deck, Blue has the 3 best creature removal spells.
Totally.
Well, and so what's very interesting thing about that, Dana, is Andrew from Ultra Budget Brews over on EDHREC.
Yeah.
He actually doesn't live that far from Kansas City, and so we actually got to sync up in OKC, and we've kind of become friends now. And he's come up to KC and attended some of our crossover events. And when we had him on, he actually asked us the question: would you guys prioritize black removal, or what kind of blue removal would you need to go over a black? And we started thinking about it, and he was actually look, if I'm building a blue black deck, most likely 4 or 3 of the top 4 removal cards that I'm probably going to throw on the deck are probably going to be blue. And he was listing off Pognify, Rapid Hybridization. It's holy crap, I think you're onto something there.
Yeah.
That blue probably does have the better removal package if you can do it, which makes no sense.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap up that hop profile. Now we're going to head over to see how this filthy deck wins games. Big Tuck, start us off. What kind of degenerate way did you want to talk about?
So this should be a pretty easy one to guess. As we've talked about before, I love modular cards, and even more than that, I love completely janky win cons. And this one does them both. So we are talking fresh off the presses of Modern Horizons, Maraudin Besieged. So two colorless and a blue. As it enters the battlefield, choose Mirin or Phyrexian. Mirin, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. You're going to be doing that a lot, usually at a discount, usually many times a turn. So that in and of itself is already your token generator, gives you your sack outlets to Ashnod's, gives you die triggers to Vela, all that stuff, right? But if you feel like getting a little crazy, you can go with Phyrexian. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card and then discard a card, which in of itself is literally what there's a cons card. Yeah, exactly. And there's one that's Monastery Siege, that's literally what it does.
Yeah.
Except at your upkeep. But if there are 15 or more artifact cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. Wow. Straight out headshot, you're out of the game. So I like I said, I love having a choice. This card's $120. And even if you want to just go Phyrexian, it still gives you that card draw, right? So there's really no lose on this. So if you're short on creatures, but you have a bunch of artifacts to dump out, you choose Mirin, right? If you're short on card draw, you can choose Phyrexian and start stacking up your graveyard. And then you also have that sweet alternate win con. So to me, it's this card really does everything that this deck wants to.
And the fact that its end of turn is huge.
Yes.
Because you can just I mean, there's been multiple times when I've just top decked it and been what do I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4. 16. Cool. All right. So I'm going to play. I'm going to set it to Phyrexian and pass a turn.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So have you been able to? This is a recurring There's a lot of things where it's say this, drink, and one of them that we've noticed that we kind of get bad with, and we haven't done yet. So I'm going to break that spell. Is have you ever actually been able to trigger this with the 15 and outright just headshot somebody?
I have multiple times.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
Actually, I streamed right before Christmas. I streamed with MTG Lexicon. They had a 24-hour stream, and I played this deck on their stream. And I actually screwed myself. Somebody had cast a board wipe the turn before, and I don't remember what I did, but I did something to save one of my artifact creatures. And then top deck besieged and had 14 in my yard and had no way to. I couldn't get there, and it would have killed the person who comboed out and won the next turn. I would have had a pretty good chance, and so by trying to be cute and saving myself a thing, I lost. I didn't get the win, but yeah, I've done it. 3 or 4 times I managed to kill somebody with it.
Hell yeah. So, like I said, easy slam dunk choice for me. It's modular, goofy win con. This is the Tuck card wrapped up in a nice, neat bow.
Yeah, I remember when this card got previewed with Modern Horizons, and I know the whole community got real excited because people love alternate win cons.
Yeah.
And really, I think this is probably the easiest alternate win con to pull off because artifact decks, like Dana has kind of talked about with his, there's ways to sacrifice. There's ways to get them to the graveyard. I mean, heck, that's the whole reason Duretti, the red planeswalker, exists, is to be the best trash guy ever and constantly reuse and recycle those artifacts from the graveyard. So having this is just the most amazing alternate win con. I actually run it in my Brutaclad 7 Dwarf permanent deck just to make the mirrors so I could turn those into 7 dwarves because nice. I like weird shit. So, all right. Well, my first one, I mean, I love Planeswalkers. I love them so much.
Yeah.
Tezzeret, Master of Metal. He's so metal, bro.
Totally metal, man.
So it's 4 colorless dimir, Planeswalker Tezzeret. He's a Merfolk. Comes in with 5 loyalty, and he has 3 abilities. He doesn't have 4 like the other ones. Sorry. I guess he's not as. I guess being the Master of Metal isn't as cool as being the Master of the Bridge. I guess it's cooler to be the Bridge Master.
I disagree, but
maybe being the Master of the Bridge is so metal, it's more metal than being the Master of the Metal.
Oh. Here we go. Next level story. The Master of the Metal, then he built the bridge from that metal. Now that metal is the bridge.
Oh,
there we go.
There we go.
Look at that. Connecting the dots. So he says, +1. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an artifact card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. I like that card. It does a lot. It's one of these modality things that's definitely a grain. Late in the game, it could definitely hurt to +1 it and get a mana rock. Like, that could kind of suck. But, you have so many bangers in here that if you get one of those, it's just like, +1 to hand, and I'll probably play it for free or very cheap. Great. But here's why I personally believe this is probably in your Yeast package. -3. Target opponent loses life equal to the number of artifacts you control. Yep. Well, isn't that just poop in a handbasket? Oh, and I didn't mention he comes in with 5 loyalty. So literally, just like the Mirrodin Besieged, you could play this. You have priority once it resolves, and you can activate it, and it's like, hey, you could try to target me and do something, but you're going to die if you do that. Right. And you kind of get to be, not the kingmaker, but I guess you just get to be the executioner. Who's going to be on my chopping block? And then I would assume the very less relevant, but Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, -8, gain control of all artifacts and creatures target opponent controls. I don't see you ever getting to that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is probably the closest there is to a spice card in the deck, really, because this is one of the intro deck Planeswalkers. This is like the one that you buy at Target that are intentionally 6 mana that aren't supposed to be good. And I saw it, I'm like, it's probably not the best card for the deck, but I like Tezzeret. Like, there's a bunch of in here, and I'm like, it works well enough, and I get to run an intro deck. If I can kill someone and say you just died to one of the intro deck Planeswalkers, that's worth it. I feel like that's worth it.
Speaking of Executioner, we'll also be talking about this card in a little bit.
No, come on.
Twofer, Mr. Tom. Twofer.
We are just not on the same page. Well, Dana, what is your first game winner card that you want to point out?
Masterful Replication is a modular card.
Yep, that was one of mine as well.
This one, and we can wrap this up perfectly because this was actually what I chose for my spice to talk about.
Okay.
So,
perfect. There we go.
Nailed it.
It is 6 mana. It's 5 and a blue for an instant. You can choose one of 2 modes. The first one is create 2 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens. That's fine at instant speed if you're desperate. I've done it once in a situation when I needed to. However, the mode that I use the vast majority of the time is choose target artifact you control, and each other artifact you control becomes a copy of that artifact until end of turn. Also, there's plenty of times I've been like, I guess I'm going to have 14 Wormcoil Engines now.
Right. So again, it's another one of those what's the craziest? So what was Wormcoil Engine the best thing that you've been able to pull and copy with this thing, or have you gotten to get one of your big boys?
I've done the most memorable one was a Wormcoil Engine. I think it was out of Vegas last year. Actually, someone was playing. A guy had already built an updated version of the Populate deck. I can't remember the commander's name.
Oh, I actually played that guy, Girid.
Yeah. He showed up to Vegas for the release with his deck built for Girid.
It just needed the Girid.
Released, he slots the commander and was good to go. So he wound up, I can't remember, it's a Godsire that's out of Alara was in there. Yep. And he had enough. At one point, he was at 200 and some life. So to kill him, I had Vela out, and I turned all my artifacts into a Wormcoil Engine, slammed into him for 160 damage, and had to sacrifice all of them to an Ashes Altar to do Vela damage. They kicked out double tokens, so then they made 20 that I could then sack enough, and I was enough to cut through his 200 life or something.
It's my kind of win right there.
That's awesome.
That's a pro play.
Yeah, real pro play.
So yeah, that's a card that honestly, Tuck, I would disagree. I don't even consider this could be a spice card, because I look at it, once again, we love the modality. Yeah. Like Dana mentioned, it's like 6 mana, save your life potentially if you just need the 2/3/3 blockers. Yeah. Or 6 mana, you probably win the game. Right. Or very, very close. Now, granted, Dana, that wouldn't win in our play group because we're just a bunch of pillow forts apparently now, and no one swings in.
Oh my gosh.
And everyone just plays Ghostly Prison. It's terrible, but I can see how in people that are actually fun to play with, this would be a great card.
I just and mostly I want to put it in the spice just to hear what was, because you don't, a card like this in my experience, especially when you have more limited decks, where I'm guessing you're actually playing this deck more than once every 4 months, half of mine. So I'm sure I put it in here mostly because I could just ask the perfect question of as a host, has X, Y, and Z ever happened? So
that's perfect.
I think when I first added it, it was with the thought process that I will play until I get one good story. Mm-hmm. But every time I've cast it, it's been an interesting story for the most part. I feel like, so it's just always stayed in the deck because it's always funny or always does something dumb or interesting.
Love it.
Cool. Well, Tuck, what is your last win con?
So this is another goofy one, and I'm glad you we talk a lot about how there's cards that we've loved so much, but when it comes down to donuts, we're we can find something better. So I really appreciate the tact and the patience of putting this in here. So we are talking about our boy Mishra's Self-Replicator. So I think this card's really great. 5 colorless for a 2/2 artifact creature assembly worker, which is stupid because you kind of have a sub construct theme in the deck. I've noticed a little bit of one,
yep.
Right? So there's a card that I was gonna put in that you already had. So it kind of sucks that it doesn't fit that bill. But whenever you cast, I guess that it makes sense because Mishra's Factory turns into an assembly worker. That's a 2/2. But whenever you cast a Exoric spell, you may pay 1. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Mishra's Self-Replicator. So a lot of times, like we talked about, you're going to be casting artifacts for free. This gives you a free outlet for mana. And then you have this, you have Karn, which we talked about, and we didn't get into it, unfortunately, but the Antiquities War, where that's kind of your backup win con. If you can't get into your Wormcoil engines or your Mirror Battle Balls of the world, this is the way that you can kind of churn out these 2/2s. They're good for blockings. They can take care of elves, sorry squee. They can block zombies. But when you do get up into that, all your artifacts turn into something else, or become whatever, then that's where this really goes off. So I'm really proud of you that you decided to keep this one in here.
I think it wound up replacing, I had a precursor golem in here for a while, which when it comes into play makes golems. And at that point in time, I was running Rudder Replication still.
Oh, right.
So that gave me, not only did it make 3 bodies, which was useful in this deck, I could hit a Rudder Replication and then it would turn into, I forget the math, it was 36 copies it would make or something.
Right.
But I took out Right because the problem with that was just hitting Vela with it usually just killed the table. Because it would make 5 Velas, which would see each other and all die and just deal 30 damage to everybody immediately.
Right. Yeah,
and then
that's
it becomes
good.
A situation where, if you have a tutor in the deck, that just becomes the
facto win con.
Intentionally not winning the game by not going to get it.
Yeah.
So I pulled a Right Replication, in which case Precursor Golem came out, and I wanted something that made bodies, and I just happened, Dominaria came out, and I'm well, I'll try it and see what happens. And again, it's one of those cards that I've done enough dumb things with it in the past where if I make a copy and sacrifice it to Altar, then I have 2 mana, and I can use that because I have Tezzeret out, and I can cast this thing for free.
Right, yeah.
And then make 4 copies, and then Skull Clamp one of them, and draw 2 more cards, which will hit me another artifact. There's enough times when you can just get a bunch of dumb things happening.
Right.
That's absolutely worth having around.
Yeah, I know, it's great. So I think I saw this in a draft a million years ago, and I was oh, that's really cool, but just haven't quite found a home for it yet. So it's good to hear, A, that you kept it in, and B, that it's actually done the work for you, right? Which is the ultimate.
And it's so cheap, you can just go. I went and bought 10 more copies to use for the tokens.
Oh, wow.
It just happened in a different color sleeve. So when I make one, I just put the card right in play, and there's the token.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I did the same thing with my 7 Dwarf Tribal. I believe it was Besh, part of our patron community, actually sent me 3 or 4 foil 7 Dwarves that I can use for my tokens. So yeah, that was pretty cool. But no, you know what? You guys literally hit on all the points that I was going to talk about. It was one of those cards initially at first glance, it was 5 mana for a 2/2, and then you pay 1 and make a copy. all right. I'm sure there's better things, but once you start kind of like looking more into the deck, and I think the kind of cool thing about it, Dana, is whether it's the Tezzeret, Master of Metal Kill, because you have 10 of these self-replicators out there, or even someone board wipes because you have 10 or 15 of them, and then you get your Vela damage. It's or no one does anything and you just swing in and kill it.
Right.
It's going to do something no matter what, unless someone plays that one instant card. It's like exile target permanent or target non-land permanent and all others that share the same name. That would kind of suck. But you'd still get your Vela damage, but you just wouldn't get the other stuff. But no, it's a very cool card. I don't know if I have a home for it really anywhere other than maybe I could throw it in my 7 dwarf deck just because I could pay the 1 and make more token copies because they are tokens. So yeah, no, that's a cool card.
And I thought about it putting it in Brea, but again, it's just like it's like way too fringe for it. So it's awesome. So it's good to hear that, like I said, that you've actually like seen it work, right? Which is unheard of in a lot of our decks that we talk about.
Well, Dana, what is your last kind of game winner card that you want to point out?
The last one I will probably point out here, and we talked about Karn, but I don't know how fascinating Karn is. Everyone just makes artifacts into bodies.
Right.
Revel in Riches does a lot of work in this deck. People tend to immediately start counting. First of all, when you drop Revel in Riches, they're like starting to go, what are you planning to do over there? But again, it's a thing that does double duty here. Yeah, it's a win condition sometimes. And there's times when you drop it and then play a board wipe or something, and like just people can't. It's an enchantment. It sometimes just sticks around because no one has an answer.
Yeah.
But there's also plenty of times when it just makes me 6 artifacts, and that's enough to do damage with a Tezzeret to kill somebody and put me in a position to win a game just because it's making raw artifacts. Those are things I can turn into something else with Master Replication. Yeah. It just does enough utility that the win condition is just a bonus on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I think Revel in Riches, if you have, not creature heavy, but if you play what I would consider a standard EDH deck of 25-ish creatures, I think that's pretty in the middle, and you have black, you should probably have a Revel of Riches in there. And Dana, you alluded to earlier, and I'm sure you've probably talked about it on one of your other podcasts that you're a part of, but something that we haven't talked about officially, we've just kind of talked about it behind closed doors. Wizards now, knowing that the EDH community is as big as it is, and we're the ones pouring money into a lot of these products for the most part. I don't really hear people that play standard buying boxes. I hear them buying singles, but I hear EDH players buying boxes because it's like, oh, there's like 50 cards I want out of this set. A box, makes sense for me. I feel like Wizards now has created too many cards, very pigeonholed and focused for Commander, to where now we've actually stopped using the word staple on this podcast because we think it gets thrown around too much. Yep. So we have, Soul Ring is a staple because it can literally go in every deck, and there's no reason you shouldn't have it in a deck other than maybe mono green. That's it.
Sure.
But we started using the word standard more. Like, this works in a lot of these decks, but maybe not for every deck. And I feel like Revel in Riches is one of those standards to where if you have 25 plus creatures, why wouldn't you have a Revel in Riches in the deck?
It's never going to be bad.
Right.
But see, for me, it's interesting. It's a great card. I'm glad they have it. Just like a Smothering Tithe. I'm glad they have it. But now we have so many of these types of cards to where, okay, I'm going to build Orzhov. Well, I should probably have a Revel in Riches. Well, I probably need a Soul Ring. Well, I probably need a Smothering Tithe. I probably need an Arcane Signet.
You could always use a land tax, right?
Land tax. And eventually I should have these because these colors need these. It's like, I can only play around with like 15 cards in the deck. Like, the deck's really not unique. I don't know. What are your thoughts on these cards that are just like standards or staples now?
I literally wrote an article about this on EDHREC back in January because Joey Schultz on EDHREC cast, we give each other a challenge for like the new year. Okay, this year I want you to do this thing. And one of the things he challenged me to was to build a popular commander deck with a popular commander.
Sure.
So I'm like, okay. So I went through the list, and I wanted to build an Exalted deck for a while. So I'm like, you know what? Okay. Kenrith seems he's popular. I can just play every single Exalted creature and nothing else. So I'm like, it's 5 color. I can just run every one, even like the bad black ones and the blue ones.
Sure.
They're 1 red goblin. So I'll just make that for my challenge deck from him. The problem I really had was that same exact thing in 5-color. Like in a 2-color deck, I think we're still limited enough that you can kind of run the quote-unquote staples. Hey, I'm playing black-white. I will throw in a land tax and a Sylvan Library and a Smothering Tithe. And, for removal, I'll run Generous Gift and Beast Within in Swords of Plowshares and Path. And then you still have plenty of slots to plan things out. 5-color deck, and I'm starting to okay, I always want to run this in black and this in white and this in blue. And I'm like, okay, I'm at 192 cards now. Go from here.
You just play Yorion as your companion, and then the problem solves itself.
So no, that's absolutely something I think, particularly in for me mentally, I really that was difficult to finally to say maybe this deck doesn't need a Beast Within.
Right.
When in a 2-color deck, I'm always running Beast Within. So
there's a really funny loading ready run skit where someone went to Modern and he's just playing mono Deece, and every card in his deck is pretty Deece. It's pretty good, right? So it's 5-color Kenrith, every card's all right, okay. Yeah, sure.
Oh man, yeah, and that's something that actually is very challenging for me. And I've started recently, Dana, putting deck restrictions, kind of like you have. Like when I needed to build Izzet for the longest time, and just a lot of it was I guess I could go combo, but that's super boring. And so when I heard CCO do their 7-Dwarf Tribal with Brutoclad, I was like, that's interesting, but still, there's Cyclonic Rift and Counterspell and Mana Drain and Force of Will, because I don't like to play bad decks. I like to play things that are good. But I've started to do these restrictions so that way I can't just do the staples and standards and just have them in there. And I wish we didn't have to put these extra restrictions on ourselves because there was so many of these amazing cards, but that's kind of where we're at, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon.
Definitely.
It's going to continue to go that direction as they keep making cards just for Commander.
And I think
with Commander in mind, for sure.
And I think the best recent example is Arcane Signet, right? That's just pretty much if you're really trying to build a good, efficient deck. So that Soul Ring Command Tower, right? Those are 3 cards that should be in every deck or whatever, the most of them. And you're okay, so now I really only have 96 cards plus my commander, right? And you just keep adding these things on top of it. So
I believe you forgot Mana.
No, that's fair.
Oh,
yeah, right. Yeah.
Die. Wrong. Incorrect.
Oh, man, Ryan and Brando love that shout out.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap up the yeast package. Now we're going to head over to the non-existent spice package. But I did type up, and I do want to ask Dana a question. So this deck doesn't have spice like the way that we kind of look at it, to where, I look at this deck, and to me, a random spice card I could think of would be Altar of the Brood. You're not necessarily making tons of tokens. It is an artifact, so it kind of fits that.
A random Mr. Combo. Oh, I don't know. I'm just gonna pull. I'm gonna pull a card out of the hat. Let's go with the card that I put in literally every deck. Altar of the Brood.
So that's a spice card for me. That's kind of actually how we created that category. Was sometimes that there's these cards that you just kind of put in a deck because you just either have a weird affinity for it, or it's every time I run white, I'm just gonna put this in here just because. So I'm curious. In the way that you deck build, do you have cards that kind of fit the way that we describe these spices that you have in decks? Or for the most part, do you try to, as you said, you're always tweaking and kind of tightening the bolt? Is that kind of more your deck building style?
I usually try to find a home for 1 or 2 pet cards in a deck. So in my Sphinx deck, I'm running Psychic Possession, which is an enchantment you put on someone else, and whenever they draw a card, you draw a card.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
For 4 mana, there's probably something better you can pick in that slot. But it's such a fun card when someone plays a Sylvan Library and then I top deck that and I'm I'm gonna put it on you because I'll get to draw 3 cards whenever you Sylvan Library. So that's one. That's one.
Okay.
I'm building an Orzhov deck right now. That's a Pestilence deck, and I love Righteous War. It's an old enchantment that says white creatures you control get pro black, and black creatures you control.
Oh, we were just talking about that. That was just
and it's like a backbreaking card, but it's really annoying for your opponents too when they're looking at your black white commander and I can't target that with anything. So again, I could probably put that slot to better use, but it's such a fun card and it messes up everyone's math. So I usually try to find a slot for something, 1 or 2 things like that. It just, in this deck, I guess I said I didn't have any, but I guess you can kind of say that the bio or the intro deck Tezzeret is, and maybe the self-replicator is. So I have, I guess, a couple, but they usually are still somewhat on theme with what I'm doing.
Sure. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, because that's the way if you just have something completely out of left field that just makes no sense at all, then it's like, what are you doing here? You could almost argue, just because it's not like you have tons of sacrifice outlets, that Revel in Riches is kind of a spice card to an extent, because your deck isn't necessarily like a death and taxes. It's more of it's a good card like we talked about, and it's like, if you have it in the colors and you making all these creatures like you should have it, but is it fitting exactly what this Vela artifact thing is? No, but it does make artifacts, so it kind of fits.
I will point out that Revel in Riches does say whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, not one you control.
Oh, that's right. Noob. All
Let's say it in.
Well, now we're gonna head over to the bottle capping. These are gonna be Big Tuck's, Dana's, and myself. We're gonna cut a card from the deck, and we're gonna add a card to the deck, which was so hard to do.
This was super
but it's
hard.
Gonna be a under $5 ad, under $50 ad, and we're going to do a personal recommendation that actually has no budget, and I took full advantage of that today, because what better than Artifacts Matter to just break the bank? So Dana, I want to start with you. What card do you want to cut, and what card would you like to add?
If I were to make a cut from the deck, it's effective, but I would probably pull Shambling Suit. Or to make a cut.
Yep, I'm cutting that as well.
But it's just a vanilla beater body, and if I have a bad board state, it's useless. If I don't have Vela out, it's relatively useless. There's been times it's been fantastic, and there's been times it doesn't do much. So it's one that if I were to make a cut, that would be the one I would take out, I think.
Yeah, and what's interesting thing about that, Dana, is when we did my Lord Windgrace deck, I cut the basically Shambling Suit in Gruul, where it's like, Star and I think 4.
Yeah, it's Voice of Zendikar or something like that, right?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I ended up cutting him for the same thing, because like you, now granted, at least your commander gives some evasion of some kind, but in Windgrace, I'm going to have 15, 20 lands, easy, but what good is a 15 or 20 when it doesn't have trample? Or have any type of evasion? So I that's the reason that I was choosing to cut it as well, because it's basically very narrow. You get your commander, yes, you could dome someone, but if you don't, then
if it had something like Menace or even like Reach, Vigilance, anything besides just that, I still like it. And again, it's from frickin' Eldraine, so I was about to bring it up because we were way off on that. It's always fun
running an uncommon too, so you're not like just a slave to mythics and rares. It's nice to have those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, what card do you want to add?
So if we're talking a relatively budget card here, is that what this is?
Yep. Under $5, and we do use EDHREC dollars and cents. So whatever you guys tell us it costs, that's what we believe in. We don't believe in this crazy price fixing, cards exploding in value that we're living in today. It is a hoax.
One I've thought about trying before, and I've never actually run in the deck, is Semblance Anvil, which is an old artifact. I think it's from the first Mirrodin block. It has Imprint. It's 3 mana. When Semblance Anvil enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-land card from your hand. Spells you cast that share a card type with the exiled card costs 2 less to cast. So I already have a few cost reducers in here, and exile an artifact creature with it. Then both my artifacts and my creatures cost 2 less to cast.
I think it's better. I think it's better than Cloud Key, to be honest, in this deck, because again, there's always the odd thing where you might have an instant or sorcery with it or creature, but I think this will really kind of help you with your artifacts, which is in reality how this deck is going to win.
Right. So it's one I've like looked at a bunch of times, and I always then mentally go, okay, am I going to have it in my hand on turn 3 or something and not want to cast it because all I'm holding is Wormcoil Engine for artifact creatures. Sure. But I think it's also one of those cards, sometimes you can't see how well a card plays until you play it. You have to just grind reps to see how it works. And I think that's one I just have to put it in the deck and get some reps in.
Yeah, no, I agree. Tuck maybe onto something to where maybe it is better than the Cloud Key.
Yeah, maybe.
But I do agree that the man, you have so much mana and so much reduction in here. Like, does this deck just like explode on turn 6? I feel like by that,
when it gets to that point, it really does turn a corner pretty quickly. It can.
I feel like you never have to
Mystic Forge out with a little bit of luck. I can start playing Artifact at the top for next to nothing.
So I feel like by turn 6, you're basically living on welfare to where everything is free and you never have to actually pay anything, quote unquote, turn land sideways. So
for sure
that's interesting. So I'll go ahead and kind of shift Shambling Suit up since you were cutting it as well. That was one of my cuts, all the same reasons. And I actually want to cut it for a card that I got to pop off. I did not own it. I did not have to do its condition, but I did this on Commander 99's stream channel about a month ago. I think you should add in an Elbrus, the Binding Blade.
Ooh.
So this is 7 colorless, legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0. When equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, unattach Elbrus, the Binding Blade, then transform it. It costs 1 to equip. So before I go into the transform side, it's a lot of mana to cast. It's only getting +1 and it's no evasion, but your commander does have built-in evasion, and I do think that with the way that you can do cost reductions, there's probably going to be someone that you can swing at with one of your creatures and get the damage through. But it turns into Withinger the Unbound. It's a black legendary creature demon, 13/13, flying, intimidate, trample, and whenever a player loses the game, put 13 +1/+1 counters on Withinger Unbound. So a few things. I feel like if you're able to do this the right way, you get him out, you're going to just start probably killing people that very next turn. So that's kind of number 1. Number 2, the biggest way you get rid of him is for people to use targeted removal. Exile, that's one thing. But if they bounce it to your hand, most likely at that point, you're just going to be able to cast the Elbrus for very, very cheap or nothing. If they throw it to the graveyard, you have a couple ways to get graveyard recursion with your artifacts, so you'll just get it back. And it still kind of feeds your deck and kind of gives you this alternate win con to where, Dana, you had mentioned, hey, I gotta give everything intimidate to kill this person, then I can sack everything to kill this person. Well, as you're killing people, he's getting bigger and bigger, and then it's like, hey, I just swing in with a 39/39 and you're dead. So I think that'd be a very cool inclusion. And yes, on Card Kingdom, it is over $5, but EDHREC says it's trending at $3.16, and so I take that.
That's a card that will be worth, again, that's a good story. Yeah. If you get it to work once, it's worth running it in a deck to try it out. I will absolutely give that one a try. I'm looking through my stuff right now. I have one here.
There we go.
A day. So I will leave it out. I will find a slot for it and give it a try. Absolutely. Because I want to see what it does. Yeah. So for sure, that's a good call.
Cool. Well, Tuck, what are you going to cut and what are you going to
So, as mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to cut Cloud Key. So, I think you have enough reduction in this deck to where it doesn't really matter. And the thing I don't like about it is that you want to be aggressive with this deck. You want creatures to die in this deck. And Cloud Key doesn't really do that much. And again, it doesn't sound like you get to this level of the game. But I also feel like this might be kind of a dead draw later in the game, right? Where like the mana reduction doesn't really matter.
Sure.
So, and I really kind of want to lean a little bit more on the theme of like sacking things and bringing them back. So I'm actually going to cut it for a card, which is one of my personal favorites, Scrap Trawler. So 3 colorless for an artifact creature, and it's a construct, so you can go tutor for it, of course. When it or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser converted mana cost. So again, you have your Crackland Ironworks, right? And just with that, you can potentially get a loop where you're cycling out things, you're putting things into your graveyard, bringing them back, casting them for next to nothing. And once you get up to your bigger things, we didn't talk about it, but I think Metalwork Colossus is one of my favorite cards, but I just can't find a home for it. But if you can kind of get a loop going with Metalwork Colossus where you're draining, attacking, making it a really big threat, I think Scrap Trawler is really going to help you push through that. Again, the only thing that the downside is like you do run a lot of tokens, and those don't really do much for you. But even if you do your Karn thing where you turn things, you're able to turn things into artifact creatures, sack them, burn people for Vela, bring back something that's less than that, sack them to Karak clans, and you can kind of get like a sub loop going. And I just think like having more graveyard recursion in this deck is really key.
I like that.
And an interesting thing with Scrap Trawler, because I actually came across this, I think it was during our own play group, is technically when, say you sack your, Metalwork Colossus, we'll just go with that, And if it's potentially the only target in your graveyard, when it hits, then you just immediately return that to hand. And then if you're casting it for next to nothing or free, that could actually just be an infinite loop right there of, hey, unless you can stop this with Vela out, you all are just going to get drained out and die. And I am always a big proponent, Dana, of, yeah, it's cool if, hey, I win the deck this one singular way, but that mindset to me is more CEDH, to where the deck is so streamlined that I got to win this way and I'm getting there as quick as I can. I think in all other EDH, having 7 or 8 different ways to actually close out the game makes playing the deck more fun, because there's always something new happening. It's not like, oh, I just win this. And if people disrupt it, which they should be, you have other ways to fall back on it. So no, that's actually a very cool pickup there.
And what you just said is the main reason I picked this deck, and why I have liked it so much lately in particular, is because it does close out games. Every game does feel different. How I kill people is often, one of those things or a mix of those things, which absolutely is what's beautiful about this format.
Definitely. So I just like I said, I thought Cloud Key was a little narrow, but it's your deck.
All right. Well, for an under $50, Dana, what is a card that you just want to cut from the deck? And then what is an under $50 card addition that you would like to add, or you think would be cool to add?
I don't know if I would pull it. Arcbound Ravager is really, really useful, but it's not what it is in the Modern Affinity deck. It's useful in this deck, and I like it, but it's also one of those cards I never quite feel like it's an absolute bomb. So if I was going to again pull something out, I could make that cut, I think, and probably wouldn't miss it too badly.
The free sack outlet though, that's pretty nice.
And it's a construct, so you can go get it with what is the new thing that you can sacrifice a creature to go find a construct? Arcbound, not Arcbound.
What was it? I had this
Scrapyard Recombiner.
Scrapyard Recombiner.
Well known in the EDH community, let's say.
Yeah. So and there's quite a few construct. Just coincidentally, like I didn't plan that. I just got Scrapyard Recombiner and looked. I'm like, I just so happen to have 11 constructs in here. It just worked out. So yeah, it's not bad, but it's also doesn't really tend to win games. And if I didn't have it, I would be fine. One card I wouldn't mind trying that I've looked at in the past is Mycosynth Golem. Again, Mirrodin artifact creature. It's only a 4/5 for 11. That's a lot of mana. However, it has affinity for artifacts, which is very useful here.
Nice.
And artifact creature spells you play gain affinity for artifacts.
Wow, and it's $17 right now.
Yes, not a cheap, which is why I haven't tested it out, I don't think.
Right.
And despite the fact that this deck is relatively pricey, it's also cards I tended to have. From collections I have bought from somebody, or when I played in a year when I just so happened to get this kind of thing. So it's a pricey deck, but $17 is $17. That's a good bit of money. So I haven't ever got the card, because if I don't know how it's going to play, I don't know if I want to make that kind of investment just to test it out. But yeah, in a hypothetical world, I guess I would like to proxy this up and give it a roll to see how well it plays.
Now, if you want to do a pro gamer move, you could transition this from slight construct to full on golem tribal, and then just go insane with the golems.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and Dana, I think you make a good point. This is a terrible example because there's always a home for it, but I think it makes my point. Rhystic Study. If it was just I'd like to put a Rhystic Study in here, but I don't know if I want to spend the $30 or $25 for this deck. The thing with that kind of card is that there's always a home for it. Yes. The issue with Mycosynth Golem is if it doesn't work the way that you want it to, there's not just a home. I'll take it out of here and immediately slam it in this deck and I'm good as gravy. You have to have that very specific artifact deck to really make it work.
Rhystic Study actually is kind of a meta rule of mine. I can only have one in a deck at a time. Not even because it's pricey, because it's annoying. And it's amazing. It's an amazing card that can go any blue deck, and it's also annoying. So I've set a hard rule for myself. I will only ever run Rhystic Study in one deck.
I will also say we had Sheldon Meanery on this podcast almost a year ago, it seems like. And
No, it's been 6 months.
Well, it feels like 6 years. But he was like, hey, can I curse on this podcast? We're like, yeah, let her rip. And he's like, futuristic study.
We actually played with him last night. He was on the EDHREC cast stream, so we got to play some games last night.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, my under 50. Here's the thing.
Oh, here we go.
Mid cast, I actually pivoted, and now I don't know what to cut. And I thought I picked the right one, but then I went through and counted, and it's not the right one. But I've been searching, and I still can't find anything. So I was going to say cut Skull Clamp. I don't have a good reason why. I don't have any good reasons.
I respect. Hey, look,
cut and Skull Clamp.
I don't.
You need to listen to the Reese episode. I did it.
I don't say this often, but Mr. Combo, I respect you for that. I respect you for sticking to your guns like a professional.
I'm going to cut it. Here's the thing. I know that there are ways to make a lot of 1/1s, but your deck isn't built on 1/1s.
Right.
That's
Correct.
not really what it's built on. So I think if you cut Skull Clamp, you have enough card draw. I don't think you're going to miss it that much. Just me. But I'm going to add in a card that, you know what? I think you like to play artifacts when you play this deck, but what's even better than playing your own artifacts? Playing your opponent's artifacts.
Ooh.
So I think you should put in Acquire.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 3 colorless blue sorcery. Search target opponent's library for an artifact card and put that card into play under your control. Then that player shuffles his or her library. I think that's a slam dunk in this deck, just because you do have so many ways to turn all of your artifacts into whatever artifact. So who's to say, it's like, oh, you're playing Joda. You probably have some big filthy thing in there. Let me go ahead and target you with that. Because initially I was thinking bribery would be good, but I wanted to stick to your artifact kind of restriction.
Sure.
So initially I was thinking Thada Adele would be a good one, but once again, stick to that artifact restriction. I think Acquire could actually kind of open up your deck and just make it maybe even a little bit more fun. Heck, if you played Squee, his Reese deck, you could go get a what's the all your creatures get +1/+1 and flying indestructible.
Eldrazi Monument.
Yeah.
Eldrazi Monument. You go get an Eldrazi Monument, and Dana, you're probably killing someone.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Chroma's Memorial. There's just so many back-breaking artifacts that you've done such a good job tuning your deck, you don't have slots for, but this opens up all the slots.
Well, what's better than one Darksteel Colossus as opposed to like 15, right?
Right. I will say, I will wait on testing Acquire until I can actually see the person's deck I'm playing with once the world is semi back to normal.
Yeah.
Right now, I will. I don't want to try to look through someone's deck over a webcam.
Fair enough.
But that's a good call.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting, Dana. I have my mono blue on my path to 32 is actually Empress Galena, and I had refused to play her through the quarantine because it's too complicated. But I finally gave in and did it. And let's just say, from the start of that game to whenever I blacked out because I was in the tank, it was just too much. And I came downstairs the next day. I had taken basic lands and scribbled on them because I had gone through all of my dry erase tokens. My board was just scattered. I think there was a house plant on fire. The whole world had gone under trying to play other people's cards on this distance thing. So I respect you for that. But I do think once you can play in IRL, this would be a great card.
Good call.
All right. Well, Big Tuck, what is your under 50 cut and recommendation?
So, as we mentioned earlier, I am going to cut Tezzeret Master of Metal. I do think it's cute. And again, these were really hard cuts, but I was like, his bridge version, I think, is just better at the 6-drop. You have plenty of card draw. You have ways to get in the red zone. And again, I want to focus on creatures. So, this is a pet card of former friend of the show / maybe never listened, Mikhail. We're going to slot in Ancient Stone Idol.
Listened.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I guess I think in my face. So Ancient Stone Idol is 10 mana, 12/12 with flash. But, just you wait. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature. As we made mention, we're getting to the red zone. We're attacking with Intimidate. So then you have a 12/12 Trample, which in and of itself is a very juicy target for copying and making other things across. It's not like a Darksteel Colossus or whatever. But when it dies, create a 6/12 colorless construct artifact creature token with Trample. So if you want to go more of like the sit back and accumulate your army than burn people out, then Tezzeret might be the way to go. But for me, I like this idea, and even in your comments, you even put where it's like verbatim, unblockable creature beats, sometimes supplemented by things like Karn or the Antiquities War. So leaning into that, worst case scenario, you attack with 5. You're paying 5 for a 12/12 trampler. That when it dies, it sort of replaces itself. And then because you have your artifact recursion, you can now get this back up into your hand into the fray. So for me, if you're going to go more of like the beat route face, I think this is one that's really going to get you there. And the best part is it's like $2. And you probably have one lying around from your Commander product from 2018.
I think I do.
Excellent. So I just thought it's like, if we want to go a big creature, this is your boy.
Okay. I like it. I'll give it a look.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting, and I think that can even maybe work into, we kind of talked about your other recommendation, Tuck, the scrap trawler. You sack this guy, you get your 6/12, but then boom, he's back to hand, right, and then you might be able to do some sort of rigmarole to where it's like, oh, now I constantly got stuff that I'm doing this in and out, and I'm all about infinite combos. So cool. Well, let's head over to personal recommendations. This has no budget. Dana, what are you going to cut and what are you going to add? Knowing that if you won the lottery and you could spend all the money in the world and it's EDH legal.
And before you say something, because I thought about this too, we do have a restriction of if you're going to put a land in, it has to be a utility land. There's a $1,600 land that would be really good in this deck. So
right
before you get too crazy,
the cut I would make, and it's actually probably technically a downgrade. I would pull Demonic Tutor out and replace it with Transmute Artifact.
Oh,
from way back, which is basically Tinker on a spell.
Right.
Lets you sacrifice an artifact and go get one. Just thematically, I would like to make that replacement. I have that in the deck.
Yeah.
Demonic Tutor then, because then I feel like I could run like Rare Replication and not have to deal with the temptation of going to get it every time. So I would like the restriction on it, but it's also, I want to say like $150 too.
Yeah. $180 now.
$180. So that doesn't feel great downgrading your tutor just for thematic.
But I will say this: if you do get this, it is on the reserve list, so you would own a piece of Magic history.
Probably not going to go down in value. Very true.
No, that's interesting. I've been blessed enough in life to where I have a really good job, and I definitely I try not to buy like these really expensive cards for every single deck. I got 34 of them. I've tried. I've started to proxy Gaia's Cradle. I can't afford more than 4. But this is a card that I've looked at, and I think that's because, Dana, I am stuck in this weird thing of I don't really have an artifact centric deck, and I love acquiring pieces of Magic history. I just think it's so cool. Well, like we talked about in our Joda episode last week, Big Tuck made an amazing recommendation of Time Spiral. And it's like, dude, can you just imagine, like, yes, it's an expensive card, but if you could sit down and play that in IRL, or I guess even stream, people will be like, whoa, I've never seen one of those before.
Right.
And I've always felt that way about Transmute Artifact. It's just like, gosh, once again, kind of like when we talked about your Mycosynth Golem, where even that's just $18, but if you spend that and it doesn't work in the deck, then you're just like, I don't have a home for it. Same thing with Transmute Artifact. I could get one and like maybe pigeonhole it somewhere, but then if it doesn't work, I just got this expensive card going to sit in a binder, and that does nothing for me when that money could have gone to making a whole nother deck.
I think one of the funny things on Transmute Artifact as well is that it's a wall of text, but even on the errated versions, it's the same wall of text. Like a lot of times they kind of can trim a little bit off the fat, but they're like, no. Like there's a lot to go through on this.
Well, the best part about it is essentially Tinker was supposed to be a fixed version of Transmute Artifact, and they somehow made it even more broken.
Brutal.
All right, so I'm up next. Personal recommendation. We too will be talking about a piece of Magic history. Ooh. So you beat me to it with one of the cards you already have in the deck, but what I'm going to cut, and I'm going to be honest, you have a lot of mana ramp in this deck. You got a lot. And you still have the 36 lands. And we talked about the colors being a little skewed, so I'm actually going to recommend to just cut a swamp. I think you'll live having 35 lands and the 18 mana rocks and all the other mana reductors that you have. So you have a card already in the deck that I'm sure you're familiar with, like Alter Sleeves, but we were one of their Kickstarter supporters, and they went ahead and created a custom sleeve for this card, but you're missing its bro. So you have Grim Monolith.
Suck.
You should probably have a power artifact in the deck.
This is so dumb.
Here's the thing, though. here's the thing. So power artifact, guys, is blue, enchant artifact. Activated abilities of that artifact are reduced by 2. If it reduces it below 1, then it's just 1 instead. It cannot reduce it to 0. So here's the thing that I did put a restriction on myself, Tuck, and you can feel better about this.
Too late.
Normally, Dana, I have 4 copies of Monolith and I have 4 copies of Power Artifact, and literally I have those in decks purely for that just 2-card combo for infinite mana and nothing else.
Because he's a scumbag, as they mentioned previously on podcasts.
But I think isn't Max like the king of the scumbags? So does that just make me part of his...
Right, the king scumbag on my show, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that just means I'm part of his army now, which is good company to be in. So here's the thing, though. I did put a restriction on myself with you. Knowing that I've listened to you for the last 8-9 months now, you are not a scumbag that just purely puts a card in for this one niche infinite mana combo. So I counted. You have 4 cards in the deck that this can actually work with, and I think it's actually good. So one of the cards that this card will actually work with is Scarecrow, because it has 4 colorless tap, return target artifact creature card from your graveyard to play. Now it's 2 mana tap, return an artifact from the graveyard to play. That just makes that infinitely better. Sure. And Scarecrow's a good card. So once again, we now have a second target. Next one, throw this on a Soul of New Phyrexia. It has 2 5-mana activated abilities. Now we're just 3. Can you imagine just paying basically 3 mana? Permanents you control gain indestructible till end of turn. Wait a minute. They have that card. It's called Heroic Intervention. So you basically got Heroic Intervention on a stick now that you can be able to do. And then obviously he can do something else from the graveyard. And then the last card that you do have is, we talked about it earlier, the Hex Parasite. And per the rules text, the 2 mana reduction can count for the X. So you could just pay 2 life and nothing else and remove 2 counters off of something.
Oh, nice.
Well, you still have to pay 1.
And
you still have to pay
theory,
1, right? You have to pay 1 and then the 2 life, because it says the effect can't reduce the mana and it costs less than 1.
Okay, so, well, because I basically looked up, and I think that's just the restriction of Power Artifact, because I actually couldn't find a ruling on Artifact. I had to find rulings on X and mana reduction. So, fine, you'd have to pay a colorless and black, or 2 life to do it. But if you think about it, because that'll actually get 3 when you're, or I guess, yeah, because you would do it for 3, and then it reduces it down to 1, and then the black mana. So, well, actually, you know what, Tuck? No, actually, Tuck, that's incorrect, because it can't reduce it to 0, but the Phyrexian is part of the mana cost. The X isn't independent from the Phyrexian, so you can just pay 2 life and nothing else. It reduces your counters. And so the cool thing about that, and the way that I kind of had it thought out in my head, granted, it's a lot of life that you'd be doing, but if there's a troublesome thing out there and you got no open mana, you can just pay 2 life as many times and activate it a bunch of times and just remove all the counters off of whatever you need to. So you got 4 valid targets in the deck, and you would own a piece of, it's not.
And you can go spend $150 on effectively maybe a utility card with no way to tutor for it. So I'll leave that. I am completely against that, but that's between you and God, I guess.
Between you and your God.
Oh man. Well, Big Tuck, what is your cut and what is your ad?
I should just quit now. So I also was panicking, and I also cut a swamp just because I do think it makes sense. And Mr. Combo talked me into that. Again, you have all the ramp, you have plenty of draw. I'm not really worried about this deck stalling out from there. So this was really hard because you had a lot of the stuff that I wanted, and I think you can have. But I think that you can. I don't think there's. You talked about like finding targets that are like broken, and you don't want to do that over and over again. And you don't have a Mycosynth Lattice, you don't have a Darksteel Forge or anything like that. So I think Koldatha Forge Master could really do some work in here. So 5 colorless for 3/5, tap, sack 3 artifacts, search your library for an artifact card and put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So it's only once a turn. You will generally have tokens or treasures. You'll have things to go get, and then this will kind of help you go find the things that you want, right? Like if you need your Wormcoil Engine, you can go grab that. If you need that Soul of New Phyrexia, you can go grab that. You want to feel like Tricky and you want to continue the train going, you can go get the Self-Replicator, right? And like, I don't want to pay 5 for it, but I will pay for 3. And then the other thing that I like about it is, and this was mostly by accident, it is a construct, so you can use that one ring. You can use that one card the Scrapyard Root Combinator to be able to go fetch this up and then be able to go get whatever you want from your deck. So I know that, like, I don't really like cards that just go, like, for example, I have this in my Duretti deck, and usually this gives me Forge or, you know, a disc or something along those lines, where it's like, I have the pieces, I just need that last little bit to go into. But I think in this deck, this would really play a lot more of like a utility player, right? Like, you could bend some of those mana rocks and go get your Metalwork Colossus. You can go get your Ancient Stone Idol, and then you can kind of get those trains going with it as well. So it was really hard, to be honest, to find one, but I just really think that this is a really good utility artifact. It's also a creature, so it can attack if you need to. Just seemed like it kind of fit the theme of the deck, if not the spirit of it.
I did have one in the deck once upon a time, and it didn't really work that well, but I think that was years ago, before I had so many things that made Thopters and artifacts the deck. I think there's a lot more, you know, random 1/1 mirrors I'm making and stuff that I can sack with than I once did. And I just haven't, like, mentally revisited the fact that the deck's changed enough to support it.
Sure.
So that's a good point. I'm gonna have to look at that and see if the next current configuration might work better than it did back in 2016.
And again, I'm sure you have one of these lying around, and if you don't, it's $4. You know, pretty low investment. Yeah. I didn't want to go I wanted to go Mishra's Workshop just because it's so expensive, but it's against the rule. It's against the rules that we put on ourselves. So I just thought, for me, it was just like, smooths out the deck, gets you those die triggers from your commander. Yep. Just feels like it does a lot what the deck's looking to do.
That's a good call. I like it.
Cool. And before we head into our wrap up, I do want to give you an applaud, sir, for being a BA and having a Crashing Drawbridge in the deck. That's literally this cast's favorite card.
That's a sweet classic.
Well, when it was first split, I remember looking at it and being like, "Oh, that's useful." There's better other ways to give all your creatures haste and colorway. Like, wait a minute, there's none other ways.
It's so good.
Unless you're running red, it's like the most efficient way to do it, and it's 25 cents, right? So you don't have to go and run and get a Concordant Crossroads or whatever.
That's also the kind of card that in like 3 or 4 years you're gonna be like, when did that become a $6 card?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, and the thing that I like about it is it's still a 0/4. So usually like these kind of really good cards are like 0/1s or 1/1s, and it's just like, oh, you're gonna die to like a sneeze. But a 0/4, like that's legitimate. It has a legitimate butt. So I applaud you, sir, for running that card. Well, guys, thanks for making it until the end. And as promised, here's some details about our giveaway from our sponsor, Level 1 Game Shop. We're giving away that Chandra spellbook plus some CMDTower playmat and sleeves. And to enter, it's super simple. Just help to promote the content we produce. You get an entry for every interaction you do with us on social media. And we're going to announce the winner on MTG Action 4 News on July 7th in social media soon after. And yes, it's repetitive because we say it every week. We're doing these giveaways every month. It could be a sweet little book like this. It could be a pre-con. It could be a chase card like the Oko we gave a win. It just kind of depends on what Level 1 Gaming provides. But you know what? We'd love that 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to us on. If you enjoyed it, leave that positive feedback. If we sucked, head over to CMDR Central because it's Dana's fault. If you'd like to reach out to us and know more ways you can enter into the contest, here's how you can do that. You can reach me at Mr. Comma number 5 on Twitter, all spelled out except for the 5. Big Tuck, where can they reach you?
I'm still foolishly on Twitter at Big Tuck tweeting, so for some reason I haven't given that up yet.
And Dana, if our collective wants to reach out and be able to contact you or find your content, where should they do that?
The best way to reach out to me would be on Twitter as well. I'm just at Dana Roach. And my contact is on EDHREC, and you can find my podcasts on any places finer podcasts are aired.
Ooh, finer podcast. I like the air that you gave it.
Oh, so clearly we're not there. We're on like the slum.
No, we're just
on the
at
slum
a fine podcast, not a finer.
Right.
Yeah, it's not podcast. We're on Dotcast. Can make it to the P. You can reach our main account at CMDTower on Twitter as well. We also have a website, CMDTower.com. Basically, you can just type in Cyclonic Rift, Mirrodin Besieged, dimirsignettower.com.
You did it.
Get wrecked. If you want to engage our awesome audio production team for your own future projects, how would they do that, Squee?
Oh, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram at Rich Chaos Records. You can find me on Twitter at Dear Squee. I'm still hanging on to it. You can email me. It's at dearsquee@CMDTower.com. Somebody send me an email, please. Make it worth it.
I'm begging
Make
you.
it worth it.
He does music podcasts and does have a full studio. I guess that is kind of a thing now. So if you do want to come to Kansas City and record,
I have hosted a session. I have. It was sanitary. It was.
he just may have to have you strip down and pour bleach all over you.
Luckily,
but,
in this world, you usually don't have 10 to 20 people in the room. It's just
and look,
a couple people, maybe.
I've been friends with Squee for a long time, so I've seen the bleach pour down naked at least more than 4 times. So you know he's game for it.
If you want to support the show as well as hook up our sponsor with the orders you're already doing, just head over to level1gameshop.com, and when you place an order in the order notes, just type in CMD Tower so that you came from The Collective. Outside of their own storefront, they also have a TCG store with over 99% accuracy rating and super competitive prices, and they also do have that sweet CMD Tower playmat and sleeves, which we have figured out how to actually sign our playmat. Dana, our playmat's on a black back, and it's that thick stitched edge, and every marker we found, it just soaked in and you couldn't see it, but was able to hook up with one of the guys that does all those sweet playmats on Facebook, and he hooked us up, told us what markers, so we can actually sign them and you'll be able to read them, but you still won't be able to read Tucker I signatures because they
Indeed.
suck. And another way you can support us is head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/CMDTower. We have some of the reward tiers from as simple as that Discord we talked about to even getting a guest spot on the podcast with one of our stretch goals with your own sweet, sweet brew. And as well as every single tier is going to give you those additional entries into the monthly giveaways. And of course, we always want to say thank you to Pink Royal for the awesome, soothing intro music into this hellhole of a content that you provide in the beginning and the end.
AKA CMD
so
Tower.
to kind of wrap this up.
Streamfest.
Yes. So to wrap up, Vela the Night-Clad, intimidating machinery. Dana, how do you feel at the end? Do you feel like we conveyed what the deck wants to do? Do you think the bottle capping gave you some interesting directions for the deck? Give us your thoughts.
I think that looking at my Audacity right now, we're just over 2 hours, and I would not have guessed we spent 2 hours talking. I would have guessed that was maybe a bit over an hour.
That's right. That's right.
So you know what? I think that is about as fine of a compliment you can pay people after a conversation is to not realize you were going for that long.
Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
Thank you very much. This was genuinely a good time. Thanks a lot for having me.
You just pushed us into finer. Not just
Right.
finer.
You can be found where finer podcasts can be found.
Oh, this was really fun as well, man. This is a really unique deck, especially in these colors. It's clear that you put a lot of thought and effort into it, which we don't always see here on the podcast, mostly when it's my turn. So it was fun to see something that was, very well tuned. You had a lot of good stories to it. So, and again, we really appreciate you hopping on with a couple of schlubs down here in Kansas City.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and Dana, I think, yes, it didn't seem like 2 hours. It was funny because I was like, gosh, my eyes are getting tired. But I feel like we've only been on for 30 minutes. And then I would flip over to GarageBand and see, hour 30, 2 hours. Honestly, looking at the deck, I didn't think there was 2 hours to talk about here. It's just I'm doing artifact things, and that's really it. And I think that's the difference. And I think that's why we still have such a strong podcast and YouTube community, is because sometimes just looking at a deck list doesn't tell you the story of what the deck is actually doing and how you achieve certain things. You get that through the stories, you get that through conversation, because like I said, I had to pivot on my bottle capping midway through this episode because it's oh my gosh, because initially, I'll be honest, what I was actually going to do is I was going to cut Toxic Deluge for evacuation, because I initially was once again looking at paper deck. Oh, Vela leaving the battlefield, that's a way to possibly kill a whole bunch of people. But after discussing, it's like, no, she's really here for Intimidate. The Leave the Battlefield is just, as you guys called it over at EDHREC, the gravy that the card has. So, thank you for this, man. I didn't mention this in the beginning, so it was you guys and the Commander Smiths that actually were the first two casts I started listening to, because I used to drive all over the state of Kansas for my job. Now I just work behind a computer because I'm not allowed to leave the house. So I've loved the content, and keep doing the good work, my friend.
Thank you very much. You guys keep doing the same.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. Deuce Magooses.